Alright, let's talk a little project and time management. Today's objectives are to apply scheduling techniques to accomplish goals and important projects. We're going to create a Gantt chart. We're going to talk a little bit about Covey's time management matrix. We're going to do a self-assessment of our current time utilization and identify some barriers to effective time management and maybe even some time savers. So one of the first things I like to talk about are competing values. Now, have you ever faced this dilemma? Going to the gym or relaxing on the couch to catch your favorite TV show? What about the dilemma of spending a little more time on a work project or maybe a little quality time at home with your family? The competing values framework it was something that was developed by researchers in the 1980s as they were researching the way organizations face a pair of dilemmas when making strategy decisions. The first dilemma that they discuss is an internal versus external focus dilemma. The second dilemma is whether they should be flexible or use control and have stability. With these two business dilemmas, we're able to kind of plot areas of measuring organizational effectiveness. So human resource development, think about being on the side of an internal focus, so you're focused inwards toward your employees, and you're being flexible. So when you're talking about developing your own people or taking care of your people, it's like giving a flex day, allowing them to wear jeans on Friday, or different things like that. Whereas when you're focusing inward, but it's about stability, these are like your internal processes. This is like your a combination of your standard operating procedures and other internal processes that keep your people in check. When you start focusing externally on the stability side, so the bottom right quadrant, this is about productivity and efficiency. So this is getting things done from an outward focus, but then also about stability. So it's taking this is your profit generating center. And then the upper right quadrant is our growth and innovation quadrant. So this is when we have an external focus, so I'll focus on customers as well, and we're being flexible. We're looking at new ideas. We're innovating. So I teach this as a business owner or manager, but it's also something that's good to think about from a personal management standpoint, or your own as your own life. And if you think about it, we constantly face internal and external dilemmas on a regular basis. Maybe we want to go to the gym to work on our own fitness, but we also want to go hang out with our friends. So internal versus external, and also with flexibility and stability. I mean, do we want to stick to a schedule, or do we want to kind of leave things open and go with the flow? Maybe go to a convention or a meeting and try to network and meet new friends, or do we use that time to go back home and spend more time with family? So we face dilemmas every day, definitely in business and also in our personal lives. And so the competing values framework that was created, by Quinn and Rawbaugh, it's a great way to talk, to approach organizational analysis. This idea that you're going to maintain this perfect balance, or maintaining the balance is kind of what they're saying is like achieving effectiveness, but honestly, I don't think that you're ever at one point in time going to be in perfect balance. I think that the way managers have to think about this is as you're walking a tightrope, sometimes you sway a little way, a little bit one way and a little bit the other, but you've got that little stick or whatever that you're using to balance yourself. So you may lean to one side for a bit and then you lean back to the other side, but you're walking forward on the tightrope. So think of your business that way as well. Sometimes you're focused on growth and revenue generation. So this means you're starting a new line of products. Maybe you've got an innovative new technology. You know that this is going to attract new customers, and that your focus is on these new customers. And from that, you know that a lot of your energy is going towards the new customers, and that your employees, as you're growing, as a growing business puts a lot of pressure on your internal resources and your employees because, you're probably not able to hire fast enough to keep up with the growing demand. So your employees are going to be working longer hours or more stressful hours. And so, after you're through a growth phase, you've got to really kind of go back and say, okay, we've got to really reward these employees or do something for our employees who where we haven't put as much energy in because we've been so focused on growth. So, I mean, I feel like that successful managers do a good job hitting all areas, but again, maybe not simultaneously, maybe um, in at different times. And I think that's kind of what we do in our personal lives too, is that maybe we don't achieve perfect balance all the time, but what we do is we try to touch on all these areas. Like maybe we go to the gym 3 or 5 days a week if we're lucky, and but we make sure we put a certain amount of family time in, and we also make sure we do a good job at work. So it's something that we all should work with on a regular basis. And the reason why we talk about managing our time and managing different projects is that we have finite resources like time, money, and energy. I've always heard that if you want to see where someone's values are, just look at their calendar and look at their bank account. If you can see where their time is going, and then also look to see where the majority of their money is going, um, well, aside from student loans, I guess, if you can see where their time and money is being spent, or their discretionary dollars are being spent, you'll really see what's of value to them. And it's also it's tough to kind of measure your energy in the sense of, but we know that there's just we have high energy times and low energy times, and energy itself seems to be a finite resource, and whether or not we're able to put our full effort into something. So, how does a business find time or the resources to balance all these competing values? So we use project management to take our knowledge, skills, and techniques to execute projects effectively and efficiently. So basically, how do we plan out all these, all of our time and resources so that we get things done? And an industrial engineering consultant named Henry Gantt developed the first widely used time chart for the United States during World War One. And so here's an example. If you were to Google Gantt chart, you'll find examples all over the internet. Here's one from looks like a Excel tutorial for Gantt charts. Um, Essentially, you have the dates and time along the top. You have your individual task along the left-hand side. You have a start date and a completion date. Pretty straightforward, right? So for businesses, we're able to manage multiple projects happening at the same time. We want to identify who is responsible for each project and determine, what resources are going to be devoted to each project. Using Gantt charts, it's really helpful to kind of see where potential project overlap may cause you some issues. So, this does work for businesses, and it's commonly used in a lot of businesses where project management is important. But what about people? Can we adapt these same project management techniques as individuals? So here's an example. If you were as a student, if you had homework due on May 24th, maybe a group project due a few days later, maybe there was a reading assignment. We have an exam that we're studying for, two different exams we're studying for that are on different dates. Well, if we're using a Gantt chart, when we map out the calendar like this, we see a potential conflict here between May 26th and 29th, where everything starts overlapping. And so you can imagine that, because, if you're taking 6, 7 classes, that, the Gantt chart gets pretty full quickly. But it's good to know, like, when major assignments and major projects are due, maybe those are times that you're not volunteering for extra things for your student organization, or you're doing other things out, or those aren't times to be going out with your friends as much, because that's the time maybe you need to hammer down on getting these things done. I don't know if you ever heard of Zig Ziglar, but I love listening to this guy. I like this quote. People often complain about a lack of time when the lack of direction is the real problem. So now we'll switch a little bit of gear to time management. Now, Stephen Covey, who wrote the Habits of Highly Effective People, has a pretty interesting, a nice little time management matrix that's easy to kind of follow. So he breaks things up into things that are urgent and not urgent, and important and not important. So pretty simple, right? So when he builds his matrix, you can imagine things that are in the urgent and important quadrant, or quadrant one. This is your crisis mode. This is like, again, it's extremely important project. It's super urgent. You got to get it done. Sometimes it's like putting out fires. Then we have quadrant two, which is our these are things that are important, but they're not necessarily urgent. So this is like planning for things. Hopefully planning before it becomes a fire. This also includes recreation, the downtime, also relationship building. Quadrant three, these are urgent, but they're not important. This seems to be like this is like your interruptions, maybe some meetings that you have to go to that you're not really sure why you're in those meetings, but somehow you are. Maybe some reports that you have to do. And then you've got your quadrant for not urgent, not important, and this is your straight up busy work, time wasting, trivial stuff. So, based on Stephen Covey's model, he puts a lot of emphasis on how we spend more time in quadrant two. So, tackling things before they move over to quadrant one is the real goal. So, you know, um, it comes down to a lot of times like whether or not um, you can really plan out your activities and stick to your create deadlines for yourself along the way so that you're not always butting up against the real or actual deadline. If you have a 10-page project, um, it's tough sometimes to crank out 10 pages in one sitting. So maybe you set out to start with the introduction and the first part of the paper that you want to have done in 3 days, and then you spend another 3 days on the next section of the paper, and then you wrap it up with a conclusion, and you plan it out that way. That way you're not saying, okay, I'm going to do all 10 pages on this date, and then you end up going right up into that time. I guess they call it Parkinson's law. Actually states that humans have a tendency, regardless of when the deadline is that we're really good at doing all of our work right up until the deadline. So it's constantly brought up in project management not to just have a deadline that's way out in advance without having many deadlines that get you to the end deadline, because it's just our nature. We see a deadline, we find other things to fill up our calendar. Whether it's meaningless stuff, busy work, maybe some other answering emails, playing on social media, or whatever, rather than actually hitting our because we have a deadline that's way out. So I mean, think about that. Look at your, with the semester, when the semester starts in August, think about your, you get the syllabus for all these classes, and the syllabus often has several projects and stuff that maybe you can't get started on, but some things you may be able to get started on. You're not going to look at it until right before the deadline, and you won't. And so just kind of see if there's are things that you can actually tackle before the deadline hits you. All right, so when we get started with time management, first you need to conduct a self-assessment. So, and when I mean the self-assessment, I mean like what's important to you? What are your goals? Do you have some short or long-term goals to think about? So, do you have goals related to, spending time with family and friends? Do you have some career or professional goals? Maybe you also want to be healthy, or you want to, have a gym regimen, or potentially you have religious and spiritual community involvement goals and ideals. So find out what are the biggest things that are important to you in your life. Then take a look at your schedule and break it up that way. Maybe divide things out as personal or work related, health related, community involvement, and maybe your goal is a balanced 25% across the board. I mean, I don't know, and your goals are going to be different for everybody, so I'm not saying they should be any specific amount. It's just depending on where they are for you. Now, consider some constraints. So you are one person, and for one person, you get 168 hours each week. And this isn't some magic. This is literally just 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's all you got. You can't make any more. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Um, it is what it is. Let's assume you get a healthy 8 hours of sleep each night. So now we got to take away 56 of those 68 hours. Let's assume maybe you're planning on actually going to class. I know with me putting videos on YouTube and teachers putting stuff up on the media site, we have it to where I guess you don't have to be in class, but you need to watch the videos. So even at double speed, you might spend 40 or 50 hours a week in class or doing some type of studying. Maybe you've got a budget up to 14 hours a week for commuting to different things, whether it's commuting to school, back and forth, maybe to work, whatever that may be. And that may be a lot. Some of you may have much shorter commutes. Um, and so you've really got 120 hours devoted for sleep and class or work related stuff. So now you got 48 hours left to manage. So that 168 dwindles pretty quickly. But it's important to kind of look at it at the end of the day. I mean, you could say, well, hey, you got a full-time job to work with. You got 48 hours each week to do all sorts of things. So from the 48, what do we do? So maybe we have an hour a week on exercise in the gym, and maybe that's not something we're real excited about. Maybe we've got 14 hours a week eating. Now this is interesting. I never thought about this, but until really breaking out time management, yeah, I mean we spend a lot of time around just what we're doing for food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Um, okay, so maybe we're also going to work a part-time job on top of our school stuff. Maybe we do an hour a week as a student leader, or up to an hour or so. Maybe some weeks it's more, but maybe on average you're doing about 52 hours a year. And then maybe we also have up to 2 hours a week kind of budgeted for going to church, visiting family, other personal stuff. And then we have about 10 hours a week just saved for fun hobby stuff that we just seem. And again, this is our self-assessment where we currently are. So we're like, well, of our 48, this is how we're spending it. We've got quite a bit of time eating, almost as much time as we have working our part-time job. We spend a little bit of time on student organizations. We're not as involved as maybe we'd like to be. Maybe we'd want to help build our CV, and it's just really tough to get involved because you're busy with all these other things. So this is what it looks like now. Well, what if you were to, work on the health and cut back some of the work, um, maybe cut back some of the fun hobby stuff? Are there some areas that you can tackle to kind of increase your time at the gym, like if that's a goal for you? Can you cut out up to, I bet you could cut out about 4 hours a week eating by, and again, just kind of looking at, okay, what meals can I just grab a protein bar and go versus, the sit down kind of thing. But, it depends on what you value. Um, if you're able to cut back a little bit on your part-time job, again, as a full-time student, what do those additional 5 hours of work get you? Yeah, does it get you the $10, $12 an hour? Is that necessary for your lifestyle? If so, then maybe you do need to keep working. But where is that? Where is it on your value assessment? So when we looked at it before, we had a good chunk devoted to work and some personal stuff, as well as um, our a little bit to community. And after we made those small changes, we see a little bit closer. Now it's not going to be 25% to everything, but maybe it seems a little bit more balanced. So we go from a sort of state where we're quote unquote out of balance to having a little bit more balance in our life based on how we made those small changes to our time. So what are some barriers? Obviously there's some lack of planning. Having a disorganized work area is a technical barrier as well. It's one of these things where if you don't know where things are, you spend time looking for stuff. And this is something that so if you ever get really serious into quality improvement or process improvement, maybe you'll take a course on Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma, and you'll learn about things like you'll hear little phrases like everything has a place and there's a place for everything. That's a core tenet in process improvement, and um, I may it may kind of describe the type of person I am, but when I was a pharmacy manager back in the day for the Kroger company, I kept a label maker in my car, because I managed multiple pharmacies over my first 2 years, and then as a district manager, I had 12 stores. So I kept a label maker at all times, and any pharmacy I was in, if it needed, if I could tell that we had cabinets that had different stock or supplies, and the area wasn't labeled, you basically don't know what's in that drawer, what's in the cabinet. So it's important for new employees or for employees in general just to not have to spend time looking for stuff. So label everything appropriately, and or have things in a neat place, and put them in the same place all the time, and that'll really trim off a little bit of time, or trim off quite a bit of time. You'd be surprised in terms of finding things. We also have some external barriers, so barriers that are just outside of our control. So this are things like life events, um, things like a car accident, a death in the family. Maybe someone's getting married, and it doesn't have to be sad. Maybe it's something good, like someone getting married or a graduation you need to attend. These are things that you can't control. They happen. It's part of life, and it's not a bad thing. It's just important that we know that these things will happen. So you're not going to be 100% efficient all the time, and times you have to uh, be ready to budget um, interruptions. But this can also be working with unorganized people. So you probably have noticed this in your careers or in your past, or like if you study in a group and you got one or two people in your study group that just never seem to have everything together, and you're always waiting on them. These are some things that are outside of your control unless you want to, if you unless you can get away from these people. Um, and then there's some psychological barriers, not really knowing what your priorities are, or just a pure dislike of your task. I mean, if you really don't enjoy your job, or you don't enjoy the stuff you're learning in school, you may just put off studying the stuff because you hate it, and that's just something that we have to get over psychologically if you want to pass the class. Managing email. My colleague Brent Reed has a lot of good stuff on time management and some other things you should check out. I'm just going to touch on just some basic managing email, maybe creating folders or marking emails as a priority. Maybe setting times throughout the day to focus on email instead of continuously checking. That would be a good strategy. That way you're not breaking up, or you're not going back and forth from task to task. Uh, that sort of stuff really adds up quickly, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Everyone has. I think the main thing is that you develop some sort of process to manage your inbox. How you're going to archive emails. This is something that I think is important as a pharmacy manager. So from a project management standpoint, emails can be really helpful in terms of making sure everyone has the proper communication. But also, you think about an email; it's time stamped. If you're very specific in your email to who's doing what and what are the deadlines, it serves a good, accountability tracking mechanism for these type of projects and tasks. HR correspondence. So this is referring to like human resource stuff. I talk about this a lot on my management rotation for fourth year students, in terms of, and I guess I touch on it a lot in Abilities Lab 6 as well, and in terms of why I want students to email me, or why I want, when I was a manager, why I had people communicate to me in email or in some type of form, or I would make sure I emailed them after we had a verbal discussion, because it again, at timestamps, it kind of creates a tracking of what's going on. If I have an employee that I'm thinking is not going to be with this company very long, or I'm going to have to make a move on potentially firing, then I'm definitely going to document everything that's discussed. Um, so, stuff to think about. Networking contacts, I always make sure if I meet someone new, I shoot them a quick email and say, hey, it's great to meet you. That way I'm not keeping up with their business card forever. Just go ahead and get that out there. Well, so that concludes our topic today on project and time management. Of course, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. You can also find me on Twitter. We'd love to take any of your questions, and hopefully this was helpful.